Amid the shimmering lights of Manhattan, William Harrington sat alone in his penthouse, wealthier than anyone he knew, yet lonelier than ever. That evening's dinner should have been an intimate gathering, but the long walnut table stretched like a frozen river, widening the distance between its three occupants. At one end sat William, upright in his chair, his silver hair catching the glow of the chandelier. The tailored suit clung perfectly to his shoulders, yet even his impeccable attire could not disguise the fatigue in his eyes. A perfectly seared steak rested on his plate, still steaming, garnished with asparagus tips and a drizzle of reduction sauce that his private chef insisted was the very best in New York. William had cut a single slice, chewed half-heartedly, and left the rest untouched. Across from him, Catherine Harrington cradled her phone in manicured fingers, scrolling with icy detachment. Her blue eyes, once vibrant with ambition when they were young, reflected nothing now but the glow of a screen. She occasionally tilted her wine glass, sipping the deep Bordeaux with elegance, yet she did not look up at her husband. Her face was flawless, but the warmth behind it had long ago faded. Their marriage was more performance than partnership. Andrew Harrington, their only son, leaned back in his chair with casual arrogance. His glass of soda fizzed by his elbow, forgotten as he tapped out quick replies to friends. His sharp jawline and easy grin mirrored his father's younger self. Yet his spirit carried none of William's discipline. To Andrew, life was a party exclusive. Clubs, expensive whiskey, and fleeting company. He smirked at his phone, muttering a joke under his breath that neither parent cared enough to ask about. The silence was almost unbearable, broken only by the faint hum of Manhattan below. From 70 floors up, the streets were rivers of light, yellow taxis inching along the avenues, brake lights glowing red in steady rhythm. Central Park stretched like a dark canvas beneath the falling snow, its outlines blurred but recognizable, a haven for couples in horse-drawn carriages braving the December chill. Christmas was in the air bells, ringing in the distance, street vendors calling out the promise of roasted chestnuts and hot cocoa. Yet in the Harrington home, the season felt like a hollow performance. William cleared his throat, his baritone voice softened by age but still commanding when he chose. "How was your day, Catherine?" he asked, hoping to pierce the veil of silence. She did not look up. "The gala committee was exhausting," she replied smoothly, scrolling further. "I had to cover for you again. No warmth, no accusation, just a fact, delivered like a note read aloud." William nodded faintly. He had once promised Catherine that his empire would allow them to live a life beyond worry. Now he wondered whether his empire had bought him distance instead of closeness. He shifted his gaze to Andrew. "And you, son? Anything new?" Andrew smirked, not lifting his eyes from the phone. "Couple parties downtown. Nothing you'd care about, Dad." His thumbs kept moving, already gone from the conversation before it had begun. William's chest tightened. He remembered a little boy in pajamas with rocket ships on the fabric, begging him to build model airplanes at the kitchen table. That boy had grown into a stranger, amused by excess and unimpressed by everything else. William reached for his fork, scraping the plate with a noise that felt louder than it was. He set the fork down again, suddenly weary. The penthouse was magnificent, a monument to his life's work. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed the skyline. Modern art lined the walls. Rugs imported from Italy softened the echo of polished marble floors. Every corner announced triumph. Yet William felt no triumph. He felt the kind of silence that creeps into a house after years of unspoken words. He rose from the table, the chair's leather creaking in protest. Neither Catherine nor Andrew looked up. Their worlds, it seemed, did not overlap with his anymore. He walked slowly toward the windows, hands clasped behind his back, eyes sweeping the city that bore his signature in steel and glass towers. He remembered his first project, decades ago, when he had stood in the freezing wind at a construction site, boots covered in mud, heart racing with the dream of carving his mark on Manhattan. He had sworn that one day he would build a life so strong no one could tear it down. He had achieved it. His towers pierced the sky. His name graced magazines. Yet here, in this glittering palace, he felt more fragile than ever. The voice of his wife drifted behind him, sharp and deliberate. "Tomorrow night is critical," Catherine reminded. The Japanese investors are expecting perfection. We cannot afford any mistakes." Andrew chuckled, tossing his phone onto the table with a careless thud. "Yeah, Dad, don't mess it up." He raised his glass mockingly, smirk widening. William closed his eyes for a moment, swallowing the bitterness that rose in his throat. He had built wealth that could last generations, but his own son looked at him not with respect, but with condescension. He pressed his hand against the glass, the chill of the winter night seeping into his palm. Far below, bells tolled from a church, their muffled sound drifting through the icy air. Somewhere near the park, a street musician played Silent Night on a worn trumpet. Couples huddled together on sidewalks, laughing as their boots crunched over fresh snow. It was Christmas Eve, and the world outside brimmed with connection and joy. Inside, William's home was colder than the frost clinging to the balcony rail. He wondered, as the city sparkled below, what all his striving had been for. The empire, the reputation, the towers of glass, did they mean anything if the people at his own table could not look him in the eye? Catherine's chair scraped softly as she stood. "I'm going to bed," she said, her voice clipped, gathering her phone and half-finished glass of wine. Andrew remained at the table, scrolling again, muttering something about a club in Soho. Neither spared William a second glance. He stepped outside onto the balcony, bracing himself against the winter gust. The wind smelled faintly of roasted peanuts from vendors on the corner, though faint at this height. Snowflakes drifted around him, catching in his hair. He gripped the steel railing, staring at the skyline, at the city that had made him both powerful and powerless. Perhaps tonight, he had sold the last thing he still owned, his heart. The neighborhood of Harlem carried a very different rhythm than the glass towers of Midtown. Angela Miller wrapped her scarf tighter as she stepped off the city bus, her daughter Emily trailing close beside her. The December wind cut through their coats, and snowflakes clung stubbornly to the wool. Harlem wasn't wealthy, but it was alive, children shouting as they pulled sleds down cracked sidewalks, neighbors calling out Merry Christmas to one another, storefronts glowing with colored lights. The scent of fried chicken and collard greens drifted from a small diner on the corner, mingling with the sharper aroma of coffee brewing inside. Angela's apartment building loomed ahead, a tired brick structure with fire escapes zigzagging down its facade. The front door stuck on cold days. She gave it a practiced shove, ushering Emily inside before climbing the worn stairs. Their unit was on the 4th floor, a cramped space with uneven floors and thin walls. But it was home. The radiator clanged noisily, trying to fight the cold, while the small kitchen gave off the faint smell of cinnamon. Angela had left dough rising before her shift that morning, hoping she and Emily could bake rolls together. Emily dropped her faded backpack by the door and unwrapped her scarf, her cheeks flushed from the cold. She was 12, at that age where a child carries both the fragility of innocence and the surprising weight of understanding. Her hair fell in soft waves, golden in the dim light. She walked straight to the kitchen table, where a dog-eared book waited. She touched its cover with care, a collection of Japanese folktales, edges frayed, pages annotated in pencil by a hand that was not her own. It had been her grandfather's gift. He had insisted she learn Japanese, not just words, but values, respect, honor, the weight of keeping one's promise. After his passing, the book had become her treasure. Sometimes, while her mother scrubbed floors in another family's penthouse, Emily would sit in their apartment, tracing the characters with her finger, whispering the sounds until they felt natural. Angela returned from the kitchen with 2 mugs of hot cocoa, steam curling upward. She set one before Emily and smoothed her daughter's hair. "Long day," she sighed, pulling out the chair across from her. Her hands were rough from years of cleaning, nails clipped short, skin red from chemicals. Yet when she touched Emily's cheek, her touch was gentle. Emily sipped and gave a small smile. "Mom, do you think Grandpa would be proud of me? I still practice every night." Angela's eyes softened. "He'd be proud no matter what, honey. But yes, especially of that." She hesitated, her gaze drifting to the window where snow fell thickly against the glass. "He used to tell me the same thing, that honor is the one thing no one can take from you. Money, jobs, even friends can vanish. But honor, that stays." The words hung in the small kitchen like an old hymn. Emily leaned closer, her voice dropping. "Do you ever think about Dad?" Angela flinched slightly, her hand tightening around the mug. For a moment, she didn't answer. Emily had asked before, and Angela always gave the same careful response. "He made his choices, sweetheart." But tonight, with the snow falling heavier, with Christmas so near, the question pressed harder. "Sometimes," Angela admitted quietly, "not as much as I used to. Life doesn't give us much time to look back." Emily lowered her eyes. She didn't know his face, only that her mother's silence about him was deeper than any words could describe. She turned the worn necklace she wore, a simple locket with no picture inside, just a promise that one day she'd know more. Later that night, Angela sat by the window while Emily slept, her small form curled under a quilt. The city lights blinked through the frosted glass. Angela traced the rim of her mug and thought about the phone call that had come hours earlier. A woman from an agency, frantic. The regular staff at a penthouse had fallen ill. A high-stakes dinner had been scheduled, investors flying in from overseas. A once-in-a-lifetime contract, she had said, worth hundreds of millions. Could Angela come just for tonight? The pay would be better than usual, though not by much. Angela had wanted to refuse. It was Christmas Eve tomorrow, and she wanted nothing more than to spend it baking bread and wrapping the few gifts she had managed to save for Emily. But debt clung to her like a shadow, and she had no choice. She had agreed, tucking away her disappointment. She looked over at Emily's sleeping face. Her daughter was her reason for everything, why she worked long hours, why she never complained, why she still smiled through exhaustion. Emily was smart. More than smart, she was gifted. Angela often worried the world would overlook that gift because they lived in the wrong zip code, wore secondhand coats, and carried grocery bags from discount stores. But she swore she would fight for her daughter's chance, even if it meant swallowing her pride again and again. Morning came with the ringing of church bells in the distance. Angela woke Emily gently, brushing hair from her eyes. "Sweetheart, I need you to come with me today," she whispered. Emily blinked sleepily. "But it's your day off." "I know, but this is important. Just for a few hours. You'll stay in the kitchen, and I'll handle the rest." Angela hesitated, then added, "Please, Emily, promise me you'll be quiet. Don't draw attention." Emily sat up, hugging her knees. "I'll try, but I don't like when people treat you badly." Angela's heart squeezed. "I know, but sometimes the best way to fight is to stay invisible, at least for a little while." She smiled faintly, though her eyes glistened. "We'll get through it, we always do." They bundled up and left the apartment. The streets were still waking, shops opening slowly, snow shoveled into piles along the curbs. They stopped at a corner diner for a quick breakfast: scrambled eggs, toast, and coffee for Angela, pancakes with maple syrup for Emily. Angela tipped the waitress with 2 carefully folded dollar bills, apologizing with her eyes for not leaving more. The waitress, a middle-aged woman with tired eyes, smiled warmly anyway. "Merry Christmas," she said, placing an extra pat of butter on Emily's plate. By the time they reached the subway, the city had shaken off its slumber. Trains rumbled beneath them, taxis honked impatiently, and the cold bit hard at exposed skin. Emily clutched her backpack tightly, as if it held not just her school books but her courage. The elevator ride up the skyscraper was silent except for the soft hum of machinery. Emily felt the air change as they rose, her stomach knotting with each floor. By the time the doors opened, the city below had shrunk into a map of glittering streets. She stepped out, clutching her mother's hand. The penthouse spread before her, vast and polished glass walls holding the sky itself captive. The air smelled faintly of leather and expensive perfume, a scent that made her worn jeans and scuffed sneakers feel like a costume from another world. Angela squeezed her daughter's hand one last time, whispering, "Remember, stay in the kitchen. Be invisible." But Emily's gaze was already drawn to the stack of papers on the sleek glass table, their edges lined with strange characters she knew too well. And somewhere deep inside, a thought stirred. Perhaps tonight, being invisible wouldn't be enough. The penthouse glowed with polished perfection. Chandeliers scattered golden light across marble floors, and every surface gleamed as though trying to prove its worth. Caterers slipped through the rooms like shadows, balancing trays of champagne flutes that caught the glow and sparkled like liquid gold. A jazz trio in the corner filled the air with the soft strains of "Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas," a song that should have brought warmth but instead only deepened the cold elegance of the night. Angela carried herself with the grace of someone long practiced at being invisible. Her black uniform blended into the background, her movements quiet and precise. The tray in her hands never trembled, though inside she felt the weight of the evening pressing down on her. This was no ordinary dinner. This was the night her employer planned to secure his empire. And she, a maid from Harlem, was here only to ensure no one noticed her presence. Emily walked close behind, eyes wide as they swept the room. She had never seen anything like it. A tree taller than any she'd known, its branches dripping with crystal ornaments, a chocolate fountain surrounded by silver platters, walls of glass holding back the storm of snow that blanketed the city outside. It was beautiful and terrifying at once. She clutched her worn backpack against her chest, her thumb brushing over the outline of her grandfather's book hidden inside. A small comfort in a room where everything seemed too sharp, too polished, too far from home. It didn't take long for someone to notice her. Andrew, lounging on a leather sofa, lifted his eyes from his drink and smirked. "Mom, did we hire a babysitter too?" His voice carried across the room, sharp as glass. Laughter erupted among his friends. Emily froze, cheeks burning. She wanted to disappear, but Catherine's eyes had already locked on her. "Angela," Catherine said, her tone cutting. "The agency did not mention you would be bringing a child." Angela bowed her head, voice steady despite the sting. "I was told it would be fine, Mrs. Harrington. She will stay in the kitchen, I promise." "See that she does," Catherine replied, lifting her glass with the dismissive flick of a diamonded wrist. "This is a $500 million evening. Everything must be perfect." Emily felt her mother's hand squeeze her shoulder gently, urging her away. "Go on," Angela whispered. "Stay in the kitchen, sweetheart, please." Emily obeyed, but the words lodged in her chest. Invisible. Always invisible. The crowd swelled as the hour approached. Then the elevator chimed, and the air shifted. Mr. Kenji Tanaka entered with his aides, bowing with quiet dignity. His suit was simple but immaculate, his expression unreadable yet commanding. Behind him came Clark, the interpreter, his palms damp, his smile too tight. Conversations hushed. All eyes turned toward William Harrington as he strode forward. "Mr. Tanaka, welcome to New York," William boomed, clasping the older man's hand in a grip meant to show power, though his smile strained at the edges. The room seemed to lean toward them, hungry for this spectacle of money changing hands. Emily, tray in her hands, set glasses on a side table and lingered near the edge of the gathering. Her ears caught every note of the conversation. William's voice thundered with promises of profit and domination. Mr. Tanaka's replies were measured, steeped in words like partnership, trust, and legacy. Clark translated hurriedly, his voice stumbling. Emily's gaze drifted to her mother. Angela moved through the crowd with perfect composure, offering glasses to men who did not look at her face, only at the shoes that carried her. She overheard one whisper to another, "Can you believe the agency sent someone like her? Look at those shoes." They laughed. Emily's small fists clenched at her sides, but her mother's face did not falter. Years of practice had taught her to hide every bruise that words could leave. The music swelled, glasses clinked, but Emily's eyes had already found something else: the contract, laid open on the sleek glass coffee table. The leather cover gleamed under the lights, its pages thick and deliberate. The English side was dense, tangled in jargon, but the Japanese side, her breath caught. She wasn't looking for trouble. She wasn't trying to read. Yet the characters leapt off the page, familiar as her own name. Her grandfather's patient voice returned to her, the afternoon spent with flashcards and the smell of peppermint tea. She saw the clause clearly, and her stomach twisted. It wasn't right. The English paragraph spoke vaguely of market shifts and review of positions. Harmless words, easy to skim. But the Japanese said something else entirely, something dangerous, something that turned partnership into theft. Her chest pounded. She looked at William, laughing too loudly, his hand gesturing toward the skyline, as if the city itself were his crown. She looked at Catherine, pride frozen into every line of her face. She looked at Andrew, smirking at Mr. Tanaka's aides. Then she looked at her mother, bending gracefully despite the insults, her tray perfectly steady, though her dignity had been trampled once again. And she thought of her grandfather. Truth is heavy, Emily, but regret is heavier. Her fingers tightened around the strap of her backpack. She had promised her mother she would stay invisible. She had promised she would not draw attention. But if she stayed silent now, she would betray everything her grandfather had taught her, everything her mother had sacrificed. She swallowed hard, the weight of the moment pressing against her chest. The pen rested in Mr. Tanaka's hand, ready to seal the deal. One stroke, and everything would be lost. Her voice broke free before she could stop it. Trembling but clear, it cut through the music, through the chatter, through the laughter. That's not what it says. The words slipped from Emily's lips like a spark in dry grass. That's not what it says. The spark became fire in an instant. Conversation froze. A waiter paused mid-step, a tray of champagne flutes trembling in his grip. The jazz trio faltered, their instruments falling into silence. All eyes turned toward the small figure standing near the coffee table, her thin shoulders squared, her gaze fixed on the open contract. Angela felt her heart stop. "Emily," she whispered hoarsely, rushing forward, seizing her daughter's arm as though she could reel back the words. "Sweetheart, not here, please." Her eyes darted to William Harrington, already advancing with heavy, deliberate steps. His towering frame radiated fury, his polished shoes striking the marble like the ticking of a clock counting down to disaster. "What did you just say?" His voice was low, dangerous, the kind that made grown men shrink. Emily trembled, but her voice did not vanish. "The Japanese text," she said quietly. "It isn't the same as the English." Gasps rippled through the room. Catherine's face stiffened, her glass of wine clinking against the stem as she tightened her grip. "Angela, get your child out of here now," she snapped, her tone sharp enough to cut glass. Angela pulled at Emily's arm, desperation trembling in her hands. "I'm so sorry, sir. She's just a child. She doesn't understand." But Emily's eyes never left the contract, her body frozen between fear and truth. Then, unexpectedly, Mr. Tanaka raised one hand. The gesture was gentle, but the effect was instant. The crowd quieted. Even William halted, his chest heaving as though the simple movement had disarmed him. The Japanese businessman did not glance at William. He looked only at Emily, his dark eyes steady, curious, and though faintly respectful. He spoke in his own tongue, his voice calm as falling snow. Clark, the interpreter, shifted uncomfortably, his face pale. "Mr. Tanaka asks, what did you just say, little girl?" Andrew laughed derisively from across the room, eager to break the silence. "Oh, come on. Are we really listening to her? She's 12. She probably thinks it's a comic book." His smirk spread as he gestured toward Emily. "Let's not waste time on some maid's kid." His laughter rang hollow, but no one joined him. Mr. Tanaka repeated his question in Japanese, his gaze never wavering. Angela's fingers squeezed Emily's arm, begging her to stay silent, to step back into invisibility. But Emily gently pulled free. Her voice was small, but her words were clear, perfectly formed. "Moshiwake gozaimasen," she said, bowing her head. "I apologize for the interruption." The room erupted in shock. Clark's jaw dropped. Guests whispered in disbelief. Catherine's hand flew to her pearls, as if the sound of fluent Japanese from a maid's daughter were too scandalous to bear. Andrew's smirk faltered, his drink forgotten in his hand, and William stared at Emily as though she had just revealed a secret weapon hidden in plain sight. Mr. Tanaka's expression softened. For the first time all evening, the mask of formality cracked. His brows rose in surprise, his eyes glinted with intrigue. He leaned forward slightly, speaking again in Japanese, slower, more deliberate. "You speak my language well. Who taught you?" Emily's throat tightened, but she answered with the truth. "My grandfather taught me. He said that to understand people, you must understand their heart, not just their words." A murmur spread, more stunned than before. The balance in the room shifted. William's empire of confidence seemed to shrink around him. Where once he had commanded the air, now the air belonged to a little girl standing beside a contract she had no business reading. William's voice cracked like thunder. "Enough!" He spun on Clark, his face purple with rage. "What is she saying? Translate now!" Clark stammered, sweat beading at his temple. She is speaking Japanese." "Perfectly. I can see that," William barked. "Tell me what she's saying." But Mr. Tanaka lifted a hand again, silencing them both. He gestured toward the contract. His tone remained calm, though his eyes sharpened. "Kore wa nani ga chigaimasu ka?" "What is different?" Emily's pulse hammered in her ears. She looked at her mother's terrified face, at Catherine's icy disdain, at Andrew's smirk teetering on collapse. Every instinct told her to disappear, to obey, to return to invisibility. But then she heard her grandfather's voice, steady and insistent. "Truth is heavy, Emily, but it is not as heavy as regret." She stepped closer to the table. The crowd leaned forward. Her small finger traced the Japanese line with confidence beyond her years. She read it aloud, each syllable echoing like a bell. When she finished, she lifted her head and spoke in English, her voice firm, unyielding. "It says that if the market falls more than 5%, even if it has nothing to do with this venture, all of Mr. Tanaka's companies will be taken as collateral, placed under Harrington Global's control. The English says only that the parties will reconsider their positions, but the Japanese, it says he will take everything." The silence that followed was heavier than stone. It pressed against every chest, tightened every throat. Outside, snow lashed against the glass, as if the city itself recoiled at the revelation. William staggered, then recovered with fury. "Lies!" he thundered. "She's lying! A pathetic little nobody trying to ruin me!" He jabbed a trembling finger at Emily. "She's a maid's daughter. She knows nothing. Nothing." He swung toward Mr. Tanaka, desperation breaking his voice. "You cannot believe this! She's a child! An ignorant child!" But Mr. Tanaka's gaze never wavered from Emily. His silence was a verdict more powerful than William's rage. Angela clutched her daughter's hand, tears threatening her eyes. The courage in Emily's face was too bright, too steady for a girl so young. She realized then that her daughter had inherited more than her grandfather's language. She had inherited his honor. The guests shifted uneasily, the air thick with tension. No one dared break the silence. William's empire trembled, not because of markets or contracts, but because a child had spoken the truth he thought buried under wealth and arrogance. And as the room held its breath, Emily's small, unwavering voice carried the weight of everything her family had ever lost, everything they were about to reclaim. The room was still ringing with Emily's translation, when the first crack split through William Harrington's polished mask. His smile collapsed, his jaw tightening as if the very foundation beneath him had begun to shift. The champagne bubbles fizzed in the untouched glasses. The jazz players sat frozen with their hands suspended above their instruments. And the guests, men and women accustomed to boardrooms and victories, stared at the girl who had just turned a $500 million deal into dust. "She's lying!" William's roar came out jagged higher than he intended. His arm shot forward, a thick finger stabbing the air toward Emily. "This brat doesn't know a word of Japanese. She's trying to destroy me." Angela clutched her daughter protectively, feeling the tremor of Emily's body pressed against hers, but also sensing the iron beneath it. Her child was afraid, yet she was not retreating. Angela's own fear pressed into her ribs like a vice. "Please," she whispered to William, to the room, to anyone who might listen. "She's just a child." But Mr. Tanaka moved first. His hand rose, a single, deliberate gesture. Silence reclaimed the penthouse. He fixed his gaze on Clark, the interpreter, whose face had gone pale as porcelain. In Japanese, Tanaka spoke only a few words, but his tone carried the chill of a winter wind across a battlefield. Clark's Adam's apple bobbed violently. His hands twitched at his sides. William barked, "Translate!" his voice cracking with impatience. But Clark could not. The weight of Tanaka's command crushed the lie in his chest. Sweat slid down his temples, gathering at his collar. The silence stretched, unbearable, until at last he broke. He paid me," Clark stammered, his voice cracking under the pressure. "Mr. Harrington paid me $20,000 to adjust the Japanese draft. He said the English was all that mattered. He told me no one would notice." His shoulders sagged as if confessing had cost him every ounce of strength. "I have a family." I needed the money." Gasps erupted across the room. A woman pressed her hand to her mouth, diamonds flashing. One of the aides lowered his notebook, his eyes narrowing. Catherine stiffened as though a dagger had been thrust into her spine. Andrew sat forward, wide-eyed, his cocky smile gone. William spun on Clark like a cornered animal. "You sniveling fool!" he shrieked, his face purple. "I'll ruin you! You'll never work again! You'll be cleaning toilets for the rest of your life!" But no one laughed. No one defended him. The fury spilling from William was not the strength of a titan, it was the panic of a man watching his empire collapse. Angela's hand tightened on Emily's shoulder, silently begging her not to speak again. But Emily, small against the marble and glass, did not flinch. She lifted her chin and looked at William directly, her blue eyes steady. "Don't talk to my mother like that," she said, her voice soft but sharp enough to cut through the storm. The words struck harder than any accusation. The mighty man faltered. William's rage exploded. He surged forward, his hand rising as though to strike, his shadow falling over the girl. Angela gasped, pulling Emily behind her, bracing for the blow. But before William's hand could fall, one of Mr. Tanaka's aides stepped in, swift and firm. He pressed a palm to William's chest, not shoving, not shouting, but standing as a wall that would not move. The air snapped with the soundless command. "You will go no further." William stumbled back, his fury colliding with the wall of shame that now surrounded him. The guests recoiled. The admiration they once had for his power soured into horror. For the first time in years, William looked small. Emily stepped out from behind her mother's arm. She stood face to face with the billionaire, her small shoulders squared, her voice steady despite the tremor running through her. "You don't scare me," she said. The silence that followed was unlike the hush of before. It was deeper, heavier. The chandelier still glowed, but the room belonged no longer to William Harrington. It belonged to a 12-year-old girl who had chosen truth over fear. The words still floated in the air long after they had been spoken. "You don't scare me." It was not just defiance, it was truth spoken by a child who had seen too much already. The crowd shifted uneasily, eyes flicking between the trembling girl and the man who only minutes ago had seemed untouchable. No one dared to speak, because silence itself seemed to take sides. Mr. Tanaka's gaze lingered on Emily. Slowly, with deliberate respect, he inclined his head toward her. "What is your name?" he asked in English, his accent measured and precise. Emily hesitated, then said clearly, "Emily Miller." The name struck like a bell in the quiet room. "Mr." Tanaka's eyes narrowed slightly, not with suspicion, but as though some half-forgotten thread in his memory had just been tugged. His aides glanced at him, sensing the shift in his demeanor. He repeated the name softly. "Emily Miller," tasting the syllables as though they carried more weight than the girl realized. William froze, his jaw clenched, and for the briefest moment, something flickered across his face, not rage, not arrogance, but recognition. His eyes locked on Emily with sudden intensity, then darted away as though burned by the sight. Angela felt it, the way his stare lingered a heartbeat too long, the way his expression cracked before he forced the mask back into place. She looked between the two of them, her pulse racing. A question began to form in her chest, one she had never dared to consider. Catherine broke the moment with a brittle laugh, sharp and desperate. "This is nonsense! A maid's daughter disrupting a deal of this magnitude? Ridiculous." "William, end this charade." But her words rang hollow. No one laughed with her. Even Andrew, once so quick to sneer, sat stiffly, his gaze darting between his father and the girl. Mr. Tanaka stepped closer, his eyes never leaving Emily. "Your grandfather taught you Japanese?" he asked gently. "Yes," Emily whispered. "He told me honor is the only thing a person truly owns." The older man closed his eyes briefly, as though the words touched something deep within him. When he opened them again, they glistened with a sadness Emily could not place. Wise words, Words I heard once before, long ago. The room seemed to tighten around them, the crowd leaning in, though no one dared interrupt. Even the snow beyond the glass walls fell slower, as if time itself had shifted. William's hand tightened into a fist at his side. He could feel the ground slipping from under him, not because of contracts or markets, but because of a girl with eyes so familiar they pierced through every wall he had built. He avoided her gaze, but in doing so betrayed what he could not admit aloud. Angela's breath caught as the realization pressed harder. Emily's pale hair, her determined chin, the way her eyes shone when she stood up for truth. It was not only her grandfather's blood she carried, it was something else. Someone else. The crowd saw only the collapse of a deal, but within that moment a deeper revelation was stirring, one that would not stay buried much longer. The penthouse no longer felt like a palace. The glass walls, once a symbol of William Harrington's dominance, now stood like cold mirrors, reflecting only the fracture lines in his carefully constructed world. Guests hovered near the exits, restless but unwilling to leave, drawn to the spectacle of power unraveling before their eyes. Emily stood quietly, her hand still in her mother's, yet her presence filled the entire room. She was not shouting, not demanding, but the calm certainty in her eyes made every adult around her seem small. William fought to regain control. His chest rose and fell heavily. His tie slightly loosened as if it were choking him. "This is absurd," he said, forcing his voice into steadiness, though it wavered at the edges. "A child's trick. She doesn't know what she's saying." He looked toward Tanaka, desperate for support. "Kenji, you know me. You've done business with men of stature before. Don't let this nonsense derail what we've built." But Tanaka's face was carved from stone. He didn't even glance at William. His attention remained fixed on Emily, as if the girl's quiet defiance carried more weight than every promise William had ever made. Angela sensed it too. Her breath came short, her chest tight. She had worked in enough wealthy households to know the way arrogance usually bent the air, but tonight, something different hung in the silence, something deeply personal, almost unbearable. Catherine broke the stillness, her voice shrill. "William, why are you letting this continue? Shut it down. Get them out." She motioned toward Angela and Emily as though they were pests to be swept away. But even she could feel the balance tipping. Her command carried no force, only desperation. Andrew shifted uncomfortably. For once, he had no jokes, no cruel smirks. His eyes flicked between his father and the girl, confusion knitting his brow. He was beginning to notice what others had already sensed. The way William's gaze lingered too long on Emily. The way his composure cracked whenever her voice rose. Emily herself felt the weight of those stares. She didn't understand fully, not yet, but something inside her stirred a question she had never thought to ask. Tanaka finally broke the silence. His words were soft but sharp. "Mr. Harrington, this girl has spoken with more honor tonight than all of your men combined. I believe her." His eyes did not leave William's face, and I believe there is more truth in this room than contracts can hold. William's jaw locked. His fists clenched at his sides. He tried to hold Tanaka's gaze but faltered, looking instead at the floor, then at the glass skyline, anywhere but at the girl standing only feet away. Angela's suspicion sharpened. Her eyes moved between the two men, the titan unraveling, and the child beside her who carried more strength than anyone had expected. For the first time, she saw the resemblance, not in clothes or wealth, but in the set of Emily's chin, in the stubborn tilt of her head when she refused to bow. A tremor ran through Angela's body. She had kept so many secrets buried just to survive, but perhaps fate had carried her daughter here for this moment. The crowd whispered, shifting uneasily. No one spoke William's defense now. His empire was crumbling, and something far greater than business was beginning to surface. William's empire had been built on towering glass and steel, but in that moment it felt as fragile as spun sugar under a child's touch. He stood in the center of the room, his fists clenched, his face burning red, his breath heavy. But behind the fury was something else, something rawer, harder to hide. Emily tilted her head, her gaze steady on him. "Why do you keep looking at me like that?" she asked softly. The question pierced him more than any accusation. The guests stirred, murmuring, their curiosity now sharpened into something close to scandal. William's mouth opened, then closed again. No denial came, His eyes flickered once more to Emily's face, her eyes, her jawline, the way she stood, stubborn and unyielding. He saw echoes of another time, another life. Angela's breath caught. She had seen it too, and now she whispered the thought she had buried for years. Dear God, it can't be. Mr. Tanaka sensed the storm rising and spoke in a low, deliberate tone. Mr. Harrington, perhaps this is not only about business tonight. His eyes moved from William to Emily. Sometimes truth hides in blood, not in contracts. Catherine's voice cut in like shattered glass. Don't you dare! Don't twist this into something else! She turned on William, her face pale with fury. Tell them it's not true. Tell them. But William could not. His silence screamed louder than her protests. Angela stepped forward, her hands trembling but her voice steady. Emily's father died before she was born, or at least that's what I was told. But she stopped, her throat tightening. She turned to William, her eyes blazing now. You knew, didn't you? You knew and walked away. Emily's small voice broke the silence. Mom, what is she saying? Angela's tears spilled over, but she forced herself to meet her daughter's gaze. Sweetheart, I think... Her voice faltered, then steadied with a mother's truth. I think this man is your father. The room gasped, as though the walls themselves had heard a secret too heavy to bear. William staggered back, the weight of it striking him harder than any blow. His carefully polished mask cracked fully now, leaving only a man stripped of lies. He pressed a hand to his face, then let it drop, his eyes raw and exposed. Yes, he whispered, his voice breaking. Yes, I knew. I tried to bury it, but I knew from the moment I saw her eyes. His gaze locked on Emily, trembling. You're mine. Emily's knees wobbled, but she didn't step back. Her lips parted in shock, her chest heaving. The world she thought she knew tilted, and the man she had despised moments earlier now stood before her, bound by blood she had never asked for. Angela wrapped her arms around her daughter, steadying her, her own tears flowing. The crowd's murmurs swelled, a storm of disbelief and judgment. Catherine stumbled back, her face contorted with rage and betrayal. Andrew sank deeper into his chair, pale as the snow outside, staring at his father as though seeing him for the first time. And Mr. Tanaka bowed his head, his voice grave. The greatest fraud uncovered tonight was not written in contracts, but in a man's failure to honor his own family. William's breath shuddered, his voice raw, as he whispered again, Emily, my daughter. The penthouse no longer felt like a celebration. The chandelier still glowed. The champagne still sparkled in crystal, but the air was heavy with something no wealth could mask. Shame, betrayal, and truth too long denied. Emily stood frozen, her small hand clutching the fabric of her mother's sleeve. Her heart raced, her mind spiraling. She had come here as the maid's daughter. Now, in front of strangers, she had been claimed as the billionaire's child. It felt unreal, like stepping into someone else's story. Angela's arms wrapped around her, steady and protective, though her own knees trembled. Years of silence, years of swallowing hardship, all came rushing back in a single instant. She turned her face toward William, her voice thick with anger and grief. You let us live like shadows, she said. While you sat in your tower, we struggled for every loaf of bread. And all this time, you knew. William's chest heaved. He had faced boardroom wars, hostile takeovers, and public scandals. But none of them left him so exposed. His lips parted, searching for words that could mend what he had broken. Angela, But Angela cut him off, her voice sharp as glass. Don't you dare try to speak as though you care now. Where were you when she cried at night? When she begged me for stories about a father I had to invent? Emily's eyes filled with tears. She turned on William, her voice breaking. Why didn't you want me? The question was so small, yet it roared louder than any accusation. William staggered back, his hand covering his mouth. His carefully crafted image collapsed further with every tear that slipped down his daughter's face. I was a coward, he admitted finally, the words scraping out of him like stones dragged across glass. I thought I could buy silence, bury the truth under money. But seeing you tonight, his voice cracked, And for the first time, William Harrington looked not like a titan of industry, but like a man who had lost everything that truly mattered. The crowd stood hushed, witnesses to a drama far beyond business. Some averted their eyes, as though intruding on something too intimate. Others leaned in, riveted by the rare side of power undone, not by markets, but by family. Mr. Tanaka stepped forward, his calm presence steadied the air. He bowed slightly toward Emily. "You are brave," he told her gently. Then his gaze turned, steel, sharp, toward William. "A man who forgets honor loses more than fortune. He loses his name, his legacy, his family." William lowered his head, unable to meet Tanaka's eyes. The words cut deeper than any business loss. For all his billions, he had been exposed as bankrupt, where it mattered most. Catherine could bear no more. She spun on William, her voice shrieking across the marble. "You've humiliated us, destroyed everything. First the contract, now this illegitimate child?" Her voice cracked with fury. "You've ruined us, William." Andrew's voice trembled as he muttered, "Dad, is it true?" His eyes darted to Emily, then back at his father. "Is she really my sister?" The word hung in the air like a bell tolling over a battlefield. William's lips quivered, his body shaking with the weight of it. He gave the smallest nod, and in that moment, Andrew's face crumpled. Catherine screamed, and Angela held Emily tighter, as though shielding her from the storm of wealth and lies unraveling around them. The empire William had built was gone. What remained was a broken man, a betrayed family, and a daughter who now had to decide whether to listen to the voice of blood or to walk away forever. The storm inside the penthouse refused to calm. Catherine's shrieks echoed off the glass walls. Andrew sat in stunned silence, and the crowd shifted uneasily, hungry to leave but unable to tear themselves away. All eyes still returned to the smallest figure in the room, the girl whose words had shattered a fortune. Emily's cheeks were wet, but her voice was steady now. "I don't care about your money," she told William, each word trembling, yet clear. "I just wanted a dad." The sentence cut through him like a blade. William stumbled to one of the leather chairs, sinking down as though the weight of decades had just fallen onto his shoulders. His hands trembled against his knees. For once, there was no roar, no booming voice to drown out his fear. Memories surged. The day Angela had stood in his office years ago, trembling, telling him she was pregnant. His own cold words, his refusal, his choice to protect his empire instead of his child. He had buried it, convinced himself it was forgotten. Yet here she was, the living proof of every cowardly decision. His voice broke. "Emily, I failed you." He lifted his eyes to her, raw and stripped of pride. "I was weak. I thought I could live without facing the truth. But I see now every deal, every dollar, every building I've raised means nothing compared to the chance I lost to hold my own daughter." Angela's arms tightened protectively around Emily. Her own anger burned, but behind it, grief smoldered. She had carried this burden alone for too long. "It's too late to erase what you did," she said, her voice firm. "You don't get to walk in now and pretend love fixes everything." William bowed his head. "I know. I don't deserve forgiveness, but I am begging for a chance, any chance to prove I can be more than the man who abandoned you." Emily's chest heaved. She wanted to scream, to run, to collapse into her mother's arms and never face him again. Yet another part of her, the part that carried her grandfather's words of honor, longed to believe people could change. She whispered, "How can I trust you?" William swallowed hard, tears shining in his eyes. "By my actions, not my words." His voice cracked again. "If it takes the rest of my life, I'll spend it proving that I see you, that I love you, that you are my daughter before anything else." The guests exchanged glances, sensing they were witnessing not just the ruin of a man, but the possible rebirth of one. Catherine, however, was unmoved. Her rage burned brighter. "You'll destroy us for her? For this mistake?" she hissed, venom dripping from each word. "If you do this, William, you'll lose everything." William turned to her slowly. For the first time in their marriage, his voice held no fear. "I already have." Silence fell again, heavier than before. Emily looked at her mother, then back at the man who had just claimed her with trembling words. She wasn't ready to forgive. Not yet. But for the first time, she believed he meant what he said. And that fragile thread of belief, almost invisible, was stronger than the empire of lies he had built. The room had reached its breaking point. No orchestra could have composed the chaos-shattered pride, whispered judgment, and silence that spoke louder than shouting. Catherine stormed toward the bar, her diamonds rattling like chains, her face frozen in rage. Andrew sat rigid in his chair, pale, silent, his world cracked open by the word sister. The associates, once eager to bask in William's glow, now drifted toward the elevator, their voices hushed, their glances sharp with opportunism. William remained seated, slumped, his broad shoulders sagging as though the very empire he carried had finally broken him. His gaze stayed fixed on Emily, though she clung to her mother's side, her body angled away. He whispered once, barely audible, "I'm sorry." Angela rose, keeping Emily close, and addressed the room with quiet dignity. "We're leaving." No one stopped her. No one dared. The crowd parted like water, and for the first time that night, it was not William who commanded the space, it was the maid and her daughter. Mr. Tanaka stepped forward, bowing respectfully to them both. "Mrs. Miller, Emily, tonight, honor belonged to you." His gaze softened, his voice lower, meant only for Emily. "Your grandfather's spirit lives in you. Never forget it." Emily bowed her head slightly, the words embedding deep in her young heart. Angela guided her daughter toward the doors. As they passed William, he rose unsteadily to his feet. His lips trembled as though every word might crack him open further. "Emily, please." But Emily didn't stop. She turned her face away, her tears falling silently. Angela's voice was steady, her back unbending. "If you mean what you said tonight, William, prove it with your life, not your money." The elevator doors slid closed, carrying mother and daughter down into the city's heartbeat. The mirrored steel reflected their faces, one wet with tears, the other lined with resolve. Behind them, the penthouse crumbled not in stone, but in spirit. William stood rooted, staring at the empty doorway. Around him, everything he thought permanent was falling away: his wife, his son, his partners, his name. Only one truth remained. The girl he had denied was the only legacy that mattered. Mr. Tanaka's words lingered like a benediction in the ruined air. A man who forgets honor loses everything, but a man who chooses it, even late, may still save what matters most. Weeks passed, and winter softened into the first blush of spring. In a quiet neighborhood far from Manhattan's glittering towers, Angela and Emily settled back into their modest apartment. Life returned to a rhythm. School mornings with toast and jam, evenings of homework at the kitchen table, the comfort of small routines. Yet, beneath it all lingered the memory of that night, the confrontation, the revelation, the wounds that still throbbed. William Harrington had vanished from headlines. His company faltered. Lawsuits mounted. Partners fled. The empire he once commanded was crumbling faster than even his critics expected. But for the first time in decades, William was not chasing numbers. He was chasing something else. One cold Saturday morning, a knock came at the apartment door. Angela hesitated before opening it. There he stood, not in tailored suits, not with an entourage, but in a plain wool coat, his face drawn, his hands bare. The billionaire looked like any other man older, smaller, humbled. "Angela," he said quietly. "Emily." Emily froze at the table, her pencil clutched in her hand. Her eyes darted to her mother, then back to him. The man who had abandoned her was now standing at the threshold, not demanding, not pretending, but asking with his presence alone. Angela's voice was guarded. "Why are you here?" William swallowed, his throat tight. "To do what I should have done years ago, to show up." He held out a small, worn photograph creased at the edges. It was Angela, younger, smiling faintly, holding a newborn wrapped in a hospital blanket. "I kept this," he whispered. "I tried to forget, but I couldn't." Emily's chest tightened. She rose slowly, taking a step closer. Her voice quivered. "Why now?" William met her gaze, tears brimming. Because I finally understand what matters. Money can vanish overnight, but blood, family, it's forever. I failed you once. I don't want to fail you again." The silence stretched. Angela's arms folded, her eyes sharp, but she didn't send him away. She looked at Emily instead. Emily's small hand reached for the photograph. Her fingers brushed it. Trembling, she studied the image, the proof of a bond she hadn't asked for but couldn't deny. When she looked back up, her eyes glistened. "I don't know if I can forgive you," she said softly, "but maybe I can try." William's breath broke into a sob. He lowered himself onto one knee, not as a businessman, not as a billionaire, but as a father begging for a second chance. "That's more than I deserve," he whispered. Angela felt her throat tighten. The pain would not vanish overnight, but in that humble gesture she saw the first spark of something real. A man stripped of pride, finally ready to choose family over fortune. "Mr." Tanaka's words from that night echoed in her mind. A man who chooses honor, even late, may still save what matters most. Angela stepped aside, her voice steady. "Come in, William. If you want to prove yourself, start here, at this table, with your daughter." And so he did. He sat awkwardly at the worn kitchen chair. The billionaire now, just a man. He watched as Emily returned to her homework, her small hand guiding her pencil across the page. She glanced up once, shyly, and for the first time he saw hope in her eyes. Outside, church bells tolled in the distance, their sound warm and familiar. Inside, 3 people sat together broken, cautious, but beginning. It was not a grand ending, not a fairy tale. It was something better, the fragile, stubborn start of healing. For Emily, it was proof that even in a world of glass towers and fallen empires, love could be reclaimed. For Angela, it was the release of years of silence. And for William Harrington, it was the first true step in a journey of redemption. The story did not end with wealth or ruin, but with a kitchen table, a family piecing itself back together, and a father learning finally what it meant to come home. Sometimes, the most powerful stories don't end with grand gestures or glittering towers, but around a small table where silence finally breaks and words long buried find their way home. In the end, William did not walk away with a contract or a victory. He walked away with the fragile hope of a daughter's forgiveness and the chance, however late, to learn that true wealth rests not in fortune but in family. For Emily, the timid girl who once carried the weight of being invisible, that night was proof that truth, spoken bravely, could change the course of lives. And for Angela, whose hands had carried every burden, it was a moment of release. To no longer hide, to no longer stand alone. If this story touched you, my friends, leave a number 1 in the comments to let us know. If it didn't reach your heart, or you'd like to share a suggestion, just press 0. The lesson is simple yet timeless. Love and redemption can rebuild what greed and pride have destroyed. We are reminded that unconditional kindness has the power to alter destinies, that every soul, no matter how broken, deserves a chance to be loved and to belong. Money fades. Reputations crumble. But a warm hand held across a kitchen table lasts a lifetime. Think of those familiar Sunday suppers when the family gathered after church, passing dishes of roast chicken and cornbread, or the summer evenings on the porch when laughter rolled out into the night air. Those are the treasures that remain. Just like a lamp glowing quietly in the window on a winter evening, a single act of compassion can guide us through the darkest paths of our lives. And so, as we close this tale, let us carry its echo into our own days. Perhaps tonight, before turning out the lights, we might call someone we've drifted from, or set another place at the table even if it feels awkward at first. Redemption, after all, begins in the smallest steps, in the courage to say, "I'm sorry," and the grace to answer, "I'll give you a chance." If this story has stirred your heart, take a moment to reflect. What would forgiveness mean in your own life? If it resonated, share it with someone who might need reminding that family by blood or by love is still the greatest gift we are given. And if the story touched you, consider subscribing so you don't miss the next journey we'll share together. Because, my dear friends, while towers may fall and fortunes fade, The embrace of family remains the one home that never truly leaves us.